It's not very often that I watch a series and immediately decide to make a video about it, but holy crap, this show is just that good. Bloodhounds is a K-drama that got released on Netflix in June of this year, and it seems like it's flown under a lot of people's radars. I saw one trailer for the show a while back and then nothing. But even just checking the ratings, you can tell the impact this show had on people. The story is technically based on a webtoon under the same name, but the connections are pretty surface level, with much of the story and characters being completely overhauled. But all that background aside, I'm sure you're wondering why I recommend this show so highly. Well, let's get into it. One of the first things that stands out when it comes to Bloodhounds is the setting. The story is physically set in Seoul, which isn't anything new for shows like this, but more interestingly, the series is set in 2020 during the height of COVID-19. And I think Bloodhounds is honestly ahead of its time in terms of this choice. Not only does COVID exist as part of this world and story, it is also so unbelievably integral to the plot in all the right amount of ways. The entire series is set into motion because of a side effect of the pandemic, which then cascades down into a variety of consequences that ultimately ropes the main characters into the struggles that he faces. And the subtlety of it is pretty solid as well. As people who've had to live in a world impacted by COVID, we have a first-hand idea of how this setting looks, which would have made it all the more paramount for them to not over or undersell the effects of the virus. But I think the series was able to ride that line perfectly. Streets are just a little bit more empty than they should be. Most of the people roaming around have their face obscured by masks, and sporting events are forced to take place without a crowd. All of these things are inherently relatable to pretty much everyone watching this, as the pandemic was very much a universally understood thing. And it's pretty impressive to me that the series was able to capture the feel of a city grappling with the dangers of a pandemic so well. Throughout the entire show, there was literally only one moment that I felt was a bit overplayed, and it was just a single line that felt a bit on the nose and weirdly explicit for the situation it was set in. Aside from that, the entire thing is conceptualized and executed really well. It's kinda cool to imagine people down the line watching this show and being able to get a pretty solid glimpse into how these past few years were. Anyways, kinda tangential to what I was talking about earlier, each and every one of the characters is also perfectly chosen to fit into this setting. The entire premise is basically as follows. Because of the pandemic and its influence, loan sharks, which have always been a problem in the city, have gotten extremely violent in their tactics due to them not receiving a return on a lot of their investments. And in the midst of this chaos is a massive power struggle wherein a corporation is trying to essentially take control of the city through the construction of a casino. The show can be pretty highbrow at times in terms of what everyone is planning at any given moment, but it manages to keep everyone on the same page without getting too exposition heavy. The schemes thought up by both the heroes and the villains are also pretty realistic. They're just the right amount of complicated without stepping into the realm of being cartoonish, which just makes the high-stakes game of cat and mouse being played all the more interesting. And in a similar vein, the main character was also able to find a unique level of balance. The main character is very likable and kind. He's almost given like a goody two-shoes kind of persona. And personally, this was a little bit concerning at first. In a story filled with crime and drama and illegal activity, having such a straight-laced character be the focus can get kind of restricting and dull. But luckily, even though our main character, Kim Jong-woo, has a very upright moral compass, it never becomes grating or unrealistic. His morality may make him stop and question the actions he's taking, but they never prevent him from acting in a very reasonable way. And even when he does act on his morality, the show does a really good job of making it understandable and making you root for him through it all. And speaking of this kind of subversion with the characters, I can't neglect to mention Hong Woo-jin, who's essentially the secondary main character. First off, when the two main characters meet for the first time, they do so in the finals of a boxing tournament. Both of them were pretty dominant in their runs, and both of them have their own unique styles. Jong-woo is pretty defensive, but can pack a real punch when he has to, usually ending matches in one punch. Woo-jin, on the other hand, is very showy and aggressive in his style, fitting both of their personalities well. And in this match, Jong-woo wipes the floor with Woo-jin pretty solidly. When these two become friends not long after their match, I was a bit worried that Woo-jin was going to be a bit insecure about his strength. Usually in a dynamic like this, where the main character is shy but strong and the side character is brash and a bit weaker, the side character is usually given a bit of an inferiority complex. Which is what I really hoped wouldn't happen here, to be honest. And luckily, Woo-jin and Jong-woo are just good friends. They're rivals and they spar from time to time, and Woo-jin may want to surpass Jong-woo as a fighter, but their friendship takes first priority over everything else. And I'm just super happy the show decided to leave it this way. It would have been pretty easy to lean into some cheap melodrama and strain their friendship with something or the other, but in a really charming way, these two have each other's backs through everything. And the writing is really good at backing this up. The dialogue sounds naturally modern in a way that never really comes across as forced. The emotions and feelings of the characters always come across very clearly without being too on the nose. and that makes the friendship and bonds that the characters form with each other feel all the more sincere. The way these people communicate and act around one another is so perfect. They joke around and have fun, but also show real emotion when the time calls for it. And it's that amazing writing that makes the characters shine. A lot of shows build up their characters slowly over time, and Bloodhounds does that with some of its characters such as Mr. Choi or Kim Hyun-ju. But it also makes use of its spectacular writing to create characters that don't need that much time to grow on you. For the main characters especially, I was fully in love with them after just a bit of the first episode. And some of my favorite characters in the show are ones that didn't end up getting full character arcs. And I find it neat that Bloodhounds shows restraint in that way. They didn't force a character arc on everyone. The main duo, for example, don't change in too meaningful a way personality-wise as the show goes on. Instead, they choose to let characters be the way they are and only push change on the ones that will forward the story and themes of the show. But I don't want to reveal too much about that since I still want most of the show to be a surprise to those of you who are interested in watching it. But just as a last note, I would not categorize the show as a comedy, but it still made me laugh multiple times throughout the run, just by virtue of the writing and characters alone. But taking a step back, it's pretty evident just from the first episode of this show that this is different. The way the show is shot and directed has a real cinematic feel to it that is somehow maintained through all the 8 episodes. I had a real tough time trying to decide on the thumbnail to use for this video since every frame just oozes professionalism. The lighting especially was done impeccably throughout. The show takes place a lot during nighttime, which lends itself well to the darker tone and atmosphere this show sometimes takes on. But at no point did I feel like I couldn't follow the action or that I had to turn the brightness up for any reason. In fact, the scenes that take place in the dark are usually all the more breathtaking for it. And on that note, I really want to praise the action and fight choreography within this show. There's a very high skill ceiling when it comes to live action fight scenes. It takes a lot to work within the constraints of reality while still making something exciting and dramatic. But Bloodhounds has a level of action that I would say goes beyond what I've seen in other K-dramas, and a lot of other Western shows in general. Even from the first episodes, you can tell that effort and dedication was put into making this feel gritty and real. The show often puts its characters into situations in which they are outnumbered or fighting against a large group, and all of these scenes do a great job of selling the action perfectly. The 2 main characters are boxers by trade, and pretty much everyone else on their side excels at fighting for some reason or another. And the way the action set pieces are set up does a great job of selling their technique and prowess. There were some moments where it felt unrealistic for the main character to be able to do the things they were doing, but these were few and far between. The show makes a point to let the protagonist get hit a couple times to show they aren't superhuman by any means. One thing that I really appreciated was that I never felt like their enemies were weak. Throughout the show, the protagonists find themselves facing off against gangsters and loan sharks, and while these aren't the most powerful of foes, they aren't something to be made light of. And even though the main character is a professional boxer, they're rarely able to take down these guys with a single punch. Their opponents may not be well trained, but they are used to this life of crime and won't go down without a fight. The last thing I want to touch on with this show is how well it manages to capture the feeling of the criminal world in Seoul. These people have their stories and their legends and their own way of doing things that is sometimes unimaginable for the common man. The normal way that some observed moments are taken by the people of this world shows the insanity of the life they lived, and without going into too much detail, even the people on the hero's side aren't perfect. None of this world is beyond reproach. It's not an honorable line of work even if the villains deserve what's coming to them, and this all plays really well with the main character's morally good predisposition. But anyways, I think I've talked enough about this show. There are a couple things that I didn't really touch on, but I think I said my piece without spoiling the show as best as I could. Bloodhounds was a real treat to watch, and I hope I convinced some of you to give it a shot. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!